Hi, everybody. Welcome to OCD and I'm joined today by Denise Connelly, an addictions specialist and counselor at the retreat at Sheppard Pratt. We're here to talk about OCD and substance use disorders. Denise, thanks so much for joining me.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So my understanding is that your role at the retreat, which is Sheppard Pratt's private pay residential program, is actually kind of similar to the way that I came to be involved with the retreat, where it used to be that people would come with whatever primary issue they had, and then they had this comorbid issue of substance use disorder,
right.
And then they would reach out for consultations here or there, and then you sort of became the dedicated addictions person at the retreat in the same way that they used to kind of refer out for OCD, and I became my team became the dedicated OCD team for the retreat.
That's correct.
What is it? So you mentioned you're a social worker and a certified addictions counselor. So what does one do to become an addictions counselor? How is it different from just generally being a psychotherapist?
Well, I came into the field being a licensed clinical social worker, and technically one doesn't have to have a specialization to work in the addictions field as a social worker. However, that's the field that I've been in ever since I've graduated, and it helps to sort of have the just extra knowledge as far as in Maryland, it's a certified addictions counselor. And then as time has gone by and over the years, there's a national certification for master addiction counselor. And it just helps me hone in more specifically for that skill to be able to treat people with, substance use disorder and other addictions.
So you have to take additional coursework and work with people with addictions.
Additional coursework and some exams and things of that nature. Sometimes you can be grandfathered in for certain things, but I think that's pretty much history now. There's just studying and exams like everything else.
Yeah. So thinking about OCD and substance use and substance abuse, I was doing a little bit of research, thinking about this discussion we were going to have, and I guess I wasn't surprised by it, but it's still a pretty shocking number that over 25% of people with OCD also meet the people who seek treatment for OCD anyway, meet the criteria for substance use disorders. Mm-hmm. And, it kind of makes sense that somebody who is feeling distressed by their unwanted thoughts and they're feeling trapped by their rituals and their compulsions, they're looking for release, they're looking for a way out. But it's such a huge comorbidity. And I had this discussion with Dr. Young, who you also know from the retreat, about OCD and mood disorders and how they both kind of, they're biopsychosocial, right? There's something you're kind of born with, this underpinning biologically, and then there are things in life that bring it out of you. Is that also true of addiction, or is it more separate in addiction, that it's more behavioral or more genetic, or do we even know?
I believe it's the same. Yeah, I mean, what's the chicken or the egg? We're not sure. There's definitely a genetic component, and there's also behavioral component. So children who are you're just raised within a family where maybe you just see that drinking is normal. It's a normal kind of a thing to just sort of go down that path. But then there's also times where children are not exposed to that, and they still, if they pick up that substance and they get most people have some kind of a response to that first buzz or high, like, wow, this is it, so then it becomes a pattern behaviorally at first. But I do believe there's a genetic component, because a lot of people in recovery will say, I was an addict way before I ever picked up a substance. Meaning that they had, there was a compulsion, obsession and compulsion to, maybe they stole things, or maybe they lied, or maybe it was, video games, or, it's just a common thing that you'll hear in recovery, that people think they had the problem before they ever found a specific substance.
So they were sort of chasing a high or chasing a buzz, and then they found something that reliably gave it to them and then took over their life, right? So do we have any idea of what the difference is between somebody who, let's say, habitually uses the substance because it reduces their anxiety, or it helps them, check out for work or whatever, and someone who sort of does the same thing, but for them it becomes a problem, like the reaction to it? Like I know people in my life who drink quite regularly, and I wouldn't know if they were an alcoholic or not, but then I know other people who don't drink as much, and yet they seem to have a much harder time with showing up at work the next day, or getting in trouble with the law or something like that. Like, would it be best understood that that's a difference between those two people's brains?
That's how I would look at it, is because the medical the disease of addiction is a brain disease. It's a mental illness like anything else. So yeah, so the people that are able to just have, we'll call it social drinking, maybe they drink on weekends and they're able to just put it down and stop. I would argue that they do not have the disease of addiction, which is a brain disease. And so people who do, same behavior and not even as much as, people are often surprised to learn that you can be an alcoholic and only drink on the weekends maybe, or just a binge drinker. Doesn't have to be every day, wake up in the morning, have a drink.
Yeah, so it's really about what happens to you when you drink, not necessarily the amount or frequency or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah. So how do you think about reinforcement when it comes to addiction? So like with OCD, we talk a lot about negative reinforcement, and it's actually kind of a very simple model. It's you have this unwanted thought, it causes you distress, you engage in a behavior that makes you feel more certain that that thought won't come true. And then your brain says like, okay, you should always do that thing that removes the distress. So next time the thought comes up, it's you feel that pressure to do your compulsions again, and you get stuck in that loop. It seems like with addiction, there's got to be like multiple reinforcement schedules going on at the same time, because you have the reward of the high and you have the punishment of the hangover, and you have that removal of distress also from, am I going to use, am I not going to use? And then you use and you feel like, okay, at least I made a decision. How do you think about reinforcement when it comes to addiction?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't use the OCD terms, right? So it's all the same, exactly what you just said. So, and for a lot of people, it's a positive and a negative at the same time, because oftentimes people feel that there's some kind of a self-worth, low self-esteem. There's a self-punishment aspect of addiction once it evolves. So there's this, it makes you feel better and relieves what you're feeling, and it also sort of like is a punishment to oneself. I mean, what OCD terms, I wouldn't know how to use those words, but there is this compulsion, obsession, and compulsion, and I actually look at it as addiction as being on that continuum, right? So I mean, I know it's not OCD specifically, but it is an obsessive and compulsive disorder. Once you get stuck on the thought, oh my gosh, I just want to get high. I want to get high. I want to get high. So that, yes, that's an OCD, but it feels like a compulsion. One must do it. So I just don't use the same terms as you, but it's the same exact process. So there's a reward in getting rid of that. At the same time, it's, for some people, there's also a self-punishment, self-damnation component of using substances and other addictive behaviors, like self-injurious behavior and things like that.
Would it be something that changes with time? Like I could imagine when somebody first starts abusing a substance, it's more compulsive in the sense of, no, I'm sorry, it's less compulsive in the sense of I have to do it, and more like I want to do it and it feels good, so I do it all the time. Absolutely. But then when they're really addicted, then they're compelled to do it. Even if they don't want to do it, they have to do it, which is how a lot of people with OCD describe, their compulsions when they're in a more severe episode.
Right. When it gets severe, people get to the point where they're actually using or drinking against their will. It's not something they want to do. And they wake up every day and they're not going to do it today. And then the drive just, is there until they do it. And then, of course, for an instant, you feel relief. And then the guilt and the shame, I say recovery ruins your buzz, because even if you actually give into it, you still have all the things you're trying to do. You're trying to get better. You're trying not to use, maybe you have a therapist that you're disappointing. And, if you're in a fellowship, you have a sponsor and friend you're disappointing. So you get this momentary relief to relieve then you can't even enjoy the buzz, because now you feel guilty and ashamed because you did it. And then it's never going to happen again. And then the whole cycle starts over. Right.
And you probably have to use more to overcome that buzzkill of shame, so that you kind of obliterate yourself out of those emotions, so it just gets progressively worse.
Yeah.
It sounds like both conditions are characterized by a lot of secrecy and shame. I mean, a lot of people that they lived with debilitating OCD for years and decades. Even they didn't want people to know they had these awful thoughts, or that they did these to them strange rituals, repetitive behaviors.
Right.
And so they're carrying with them a lot of shame, a lot of I'm defective. And we treat OCD with exposure and response prevention, with CBT, with mindfulness, but I'm noticing more and more that I'm doing more and more shame work these days. That that's a sort of an integral part of the treatment, because until you can address that, it's always going to show up and get in the way of the work.
Right.
You're trying, because you need a lot of courage to overcome these challenges. And if you don't think you're a decent person or worth getting better,
Mm-hmm.
then how are you going to find that courage to actually do what it takes to get better?
Yeah.
Can you kind of shed some light on the role of secrecy in addiction?
Yeah, I first want to just touch on the shame a little bit, because I would also argue that even people that get hung up with the OCD, I think the shame is often there before. Shame can often go back to just, however young, a childhood situation. It doesn't even have to be some kind of a severe abuse or anything like that. For whatever reason, a person just doesn't feel, a kid just doesn't feel good enough, smart enough, anything enough. And so there's sort of a shame kind of built in. And then you find that these, whether it's picking up a substance or a behavior, that again, it sort of relieves that a little bit. And then it gets to the point where, it becomes a bigger issue of like, oh my gosh, I can't let anybody know I'm doing these things. But I just think it's kind of a baseline amount of shame before this stuff even starts. Then you start doing these behaviors. And of course, if you're using substances, there's lifestyle behaviors that go along with that are very, what someone might be, selling their body for sex or pawning their mom's jewelry for money or who knows what. So there's also a lot of lifestyle things that then add more shame on top of shame. So yeah, the secrecy is self-preservation. The lying and the secrets are about self-preservation, because if they find out, if they only knew, surely I'll be annihilated. It's kind of like not the words they think, but it's sort of the fear that I have to keep this secret. It's a joke, not a joke. We say, how do you know when an addict is lying? Well, their lips are moving.
Right.
And so, and that's frustrating for families and people that care about them. But the bottom line is it's about self-preservation. And it's sort of goes hand in hand with having to keep things looking normal as best we can on the outside, and keep, the craziness and the insanity and the obsession on the inside, tamped down. So it's just part and parcel, I think, definitely with addiction. I would imagine with OCD as well.
Well, the lying that you're referring to kind of makes me think of somebody who it was being held hostage, and the police comes to the door, and the person's behind them with a gun or something like that, and the police says, "Everything okay?" And they say, "Yes, everything's okay." Right? It's lying under this intense pressure that to tell the truth would just blow up your entire world.
Right.
And I do meet a lot of people with OCD where, to tell the truth of the content of some of these intrusive thoughts, or how I've been trying to be certain about them, would in some cases, if you go to the wrong treatment provider, you might end up, being put under the wrong treatment or reported to the police or something like that, out of fear that you're not, safe around children or something like that.
Because the lies cover up the shame. It's just more of the same. Like we can't let anybody know.
Right. So this sort of touches on a much larger issue of mental health stigma in general. People can't just talk about what they're experiencing because there's judgment out there, or some of it is very real judgment, and some of it is the self-judgment that's then projected onto others. They won't love me if they know that I have this problem.
Right. But that's the beautiful part of residential treatment, or getting into some kind of whether it's 12-step fellowship or some other kind of support group, being able to be in a community of people where you can actually hear other people who are further along talk about those secrets out loud in a room full of people, and feel supported and cared about and not judged, and no one runs screaming from the room. That's how people can begin to know that, that first feeling of like, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one. It's such a relief. It doesn't solve the problem, but it's nice to know you're not the only one on the island, that's feeling that way. So the importance of finding a community, and a lot of times for the folks that we work with, they're coming here for residential and patient stay. So whether there's substance use or OCD or whatever it is, to just be in a psychodynamics group and hear other people talking about the same things they're ashamed about, and know that it's safe to start to do so. And then once people can start to do so, there's such a relief that comes with being able to just start to be honest in a supportive, environment, and then go from there. So,
the most like the term I'm most familiar with in terms of treatment for addiction is 12-step. It seems to be among the more popular approaches. Are there other approaches that are also used, or 12-step is very obviously very abstinence focused. Are there other programs that also work that are designed for different personality types or anything like that?
Well, I don't know about, I don't know enough to say like which specific personality types. I do know that there are other, kind of support groups. My philosophy is you must have a supportive community for specifically your recovery and sobriety, staying clean, whatever you want to say. Because the opposite of addiction is connection. Connecting with others means you have to connect with people who get it. So the people who have also experienced those types of shame, guilt, lifestyle issues, whatever the case may be, who are also trying to stay clean and sober. It's important because, again, it's a brain disease. As of today, there's no cure for the addiction. So it sort of goes into remission. And if one picks up again, it wakes the beast, is how I refer to it. So in order to keep it in remission, it's like the daily medicine is some kind of a recovery support group. Obviously 12-step is, it's out there, it's very familiar, there's lots of it, but there's other types. There's Smart Recovery, there's Celebrate Recovery, there's, I think, Women for Recovery, there's different things out there. Any support group, someone, maybe a therapist who's running a support group. I don't care where you find it. It's just important that you find it.
Yes, finding your tribe seems to be
yes, totally.
essential.
Totally. Where you can feel supported and not judged based on the crazy stuff that's in your head.
We talk about in the OCD world about it being a chronic condition,
yes,
over which you develop mastery. Sometimes we use terms like relapse and recovery and remission.
Yeah.
But it seems to me a little bit different from how it's talked about in addiction, where in OCD you expect to have bumps in the road, and you just kind of, you work through them. Maybe you increase your treatment contact, or you change your medication, or, you just get back to doing the work. And only in more severe cases does your life get completely turned upside down again. Whereas in addiction, it feels a much more thin ice, much more like you're being stalked by the addiction. And if it's in remission, it's kind of just waiting for an opportunity to pounce again. It has speaking from within the OCD community, OCD can be so vicious and so cruel. But it strikes me that addiction is maybe even a little bit more sadistic in that way, that it can kind of just wait for the opportunity to make you start over. Like with OCD, we don't feel like we're starting over because the hard part was not knowing you had OCD, and then the rest is the work. But once you know it and you do the work, you expect things to go up and down, hopefully mostly up. But with addiction, it seems much more absolutist.
Yes and no. It's because I basically say the same thing to folks, right? So yes, it can be up and down. And so if you slip, relapse, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't mean you have to throw in the towel and start all over again. I mean, okay, so you take a look at, okay, what's happening? We do the same thing. You step up the treatment, you step up, maybe you go to more meetings, maybe you see your therapist a little bit more often. Maybe for some people, they need some kind of a medication assisted, therapy to begin with, something like that. We just kind of look at it in the same way. It's a very vicious disease for sure. Absolutely. But the goal of recovery is not to be white knuckling it the whole time. And that is the case in early recovery for a lot of people. People who really want to stay clean, it is scary and sort of does feel like it's chasing you around. And that can be a motivator at times. But it's hard if you're in isolation with that, right? And white knuckling it. It's when you have this supportive group of people in various stages of recovery that can just, cheer you on. It's okay. It's okay. You just hang in there. It's going to get better. And you can hopefully believe them because they've been where you are and they're further along in the process. Just don't pick up no matter what. I mean, with addiction, it's just like, don't pick it up and you won't put it in you. Like, it's literally when it gets to that point where it's just like, no matter what, don't pick it up. Don't use no matter what. Maybe tomorrow, not today, and that's so just for today, one day at a time is a way to also deal with that obsessive compulsive, oh my God, I just want to get high. I want to drink so bad. Oh my gosh. And so, for now, maybe you just give yourself permission to do it tomorrow. Hopefully you wake up tomorrow and you say, just for today, all over again. That's the goal. But I can get through one day. I can just get through this next hour and, call your sponsor, talk to somebody who's in recovery.
I like that you said, yeah. I like that you said that, the goal isn't to white knuckle your way through life, because we have that problem too. People start exposure therapy for their fears, for their OCD. And it's a lot of this. It's like trying not to, wash their hands, or trying not to ruminate, or trying not to do whatever ritual.
Right.
And maybe that's where you have to start, in the same way that also, delaying your compulsions. I'll go back and check the stove in an hour. I'm going to set my timer. I'm not going to do it right now.
Right.
But at the end of the day, what you have to do is be able to learn how to be in the presence of those urges, understand that they're impermanent, and step forward in your life however you see fit, values wise, while that urge comes and goes, and know that it will come and go kind of as it pleases.
Yeah, ride the wave. That's what we say. Ride the wave. It'll get bad and it'll subside. It's just ride the wave. Wait it out.
How do you handle when you're working with somebody and helping them attain sobriety, but you know that they're not just dealing with their addiction, they're also dealing with a co-occurring condition like a mood disorder or like OCD, and the mood disorder and the OCD is telling them, you're bad, you're dirty, there's something wrong with you, you have to use. And the addiction saying, yeah, that's right, you're terrible, So they're not, it's just got to be harder than dealing with, obviously I would find it quite strange if someone had substance use disorder and they didn't have any other kind of co-occurring pressures. Even maybe it's just trauma, it's trauma or family issues or something like that, or stress, or financial stress, job stress.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're dealing with two co-occurring mental health conditions, and one is kind of creating the symptoms of the other, and the symptoms of the other is sort of exacerbating the symptoms of the first one, how do you juggle that in your work from the addiction standpoint?
Well, that's exactly why we have the co-occurring track at the retreat anyway, because people come in with mental health things and their substance use has been maybe self-medicating or whatever. So the importance of the work that I do every day is helping people learn how to manage, I call it both sides of the equation. On the one hand, you have whatever the mental health issue is, depression, bipolar, OCD, anxiety, whatever it is, trauma, PTSD, I don't care, whatever. And you've been using substances, prescribed or otherwise, to manage those symptoms. So along the way, and there's nothing wrong in the beginning using substances. And if you're having a glass of wine to chill out at the night, or if you're prescribed a benzodiazepine, and there's nothing wrong with that and you're not abusing them, but over time, when you're using them to manage the symptoms of the mental health issues, then it can become its own problem. So it's really important to figure out both sides have to have a treatment plan and an aftercare plan, because if you only do one, you won't be successful in either. So that's really just how we strive to look at this thing. First starts with abstinence. Even if a person does not have addiction, if you have a psychiatric disorder and you're taking psychiatric medications, it's best to be abstinent from all substances, including alcohol, including marijuana, right? And maybe even sometimes certain prescribed medications. If your drug of choice is stimulants, if your drug of choice is benzos, then sometimes they have to be avoided, just saying. So it's important to figure out, okay, abstinence first. Oftentimes people will find, okay, no problem. But it's in the trying to be abstinent that they find out they have a problem, because it's a lot harder than they think, because they haven't really tried before, because it hasn't really been considered a problem.
Right. I think there've got to be a lot of people out there who didn't realize they had a mental health condition until they tried to just stay in reality for a full 24 hours without going into a state of unreality.
Right.
I think because we all have our ways of going into states of unreality, especially with things that are fast acting and really change your mood and change the way your body feels.
Right.
So in your work, with people who have psychiatric conditions, including addictions, I would imagine that you do draw a distinction between taking something like a long-acting SSRI for your depression and a short-acting benzodiazepine for your anxiety, because one the benzo is both not just a habit-forming and addictive, but also so immediate and changes you from one state to the next like that, right?
Yep. Indeed. And when you're taking this psychotropic medications appropriately for whatever the mental illness is, if you add alcohol, if you add marijuana, they're the two main ones that people, think are okay, then that medication is not working the way that it's supposed to either. So another reason for abstinence, yes, totally a proponent of taking the correct medication if you have bipolar disorder or depression or something like that. Absolutely, positively, you have to take the right medication for it and not add something else into it to make it not work. You know what I'm saying? Like alcohol or marijuana. So, and then,
One of the things that you just reminded me of, I see some people with OCD and co-occurring substance use issues who have a little trouble. The OCD makes it difficult to know where to draw the line, right? So there's this idea that I'm not supposed to put anything in my body that changes my mind, right? And they can get in, for lack of a better word, get in their head about whether or not it's even okay to take their psychiatrically prescribed, mood stabilizer for bipolar disorder, right? Because that's changing me. Yeah. And I think you would, like you just said, obviously, a doctor prescribed that, it's what you need, that's actually going to keep you sober. But when the OCD comes in and says, well, why are you drawing the line here? What if you draw the line here? How do you have certainty? So I also encounter people who struggle with, what if I relapse? What if I'm not following the 12-step perfectly and I'm relapsing because of something that was in the food that I ate or something I smelled walking down the street? How do you help people maintain some level of psychological flexibility with their sobriety while also taking their sobriety very seriously?
Okay, so a couple different things. I want to touch on the 12-step, but I first want to say, as far as taking the medication. So that's a distinction that people, well, why would I, because we oftentimes see people coming to the retreat that don't want to take any medications, period, just for whatever reason. So, but in terms of people with the substance use issue, just explaining it to them when you're taking, an antidepressant, SSRI, whatever, mood stabilizer, those things are not making you high or feel something. They're adjusting your brain to, there's something going on that's not quite right in your brain and your body chemistry. And those medications are, doing what they do to fix that. Well, you could argue that, so does when I smoke pot, I don't have anxiety, or when I drink a glass of wine. Yes, but that's also introducing something that's changing how you feel, literally like the high state. You feel yes, the mood stabilizers adjust your mood, but you don't really feel that. It's just happening. If you drink a glass of wine, you feel a warm, fuzzy feeling, right? So it's just deciding between those two things. So I just encourage people, and with anxiety, I just want to put this out there too. Like, well, there's no cure or medicine for anxiety other than dealing with the anxiety. Like if you have depression, you need to take a medication to balance something out. With anxiety, yes, you could be prescribed something that makes you feel a warm, fuzzy feeling and maybe takes the edge off of that anxiety. But for anxiety, you have to learn how to lean into it, walk through it, deal with it. I call it building confidence in your ability to manage whatever it is that's causing your anxiety. So that's more your turf. That's just kind of how I sort of go.
No, I think it's definitely shared territory.
There's no cure for it. You have to deal with it.
Yeah, it's learning to accept uncertainty.
Exactly. Yeah. And then with the 12-step, it's important. I'm really glad you touched on that because it is true. And I tell people if they're into the 12-step thing and they're going to have a sponsor, and if they have a co-occurring mental illness, I say be sure to find a sponsor who understands that is really a thing. Because you absolutely positively have to take your psychotropic medications, and your sponsor in that fellowship would need to understand that that's something separate than, some people just think it's totally just don't drink, don't get high, and don't put anything in you. And for people who really have a co-occurring disease, that's deadly. And I've seen it be deadly. So it's a real thing. So, I just encourage people to find a sponsor who understands that there's mental health issues that need to be treated separately, so that they don't have any issue if they have to take, whatever medications they're taking that does not impact their sobriety or their clean time at all. But they do want to have a sponsor that understands that.
Right.
Because I have seen people be told to get off of all their medications. And I do know of cases where sadly people have died as a result.
That's awful. Yeah.
It is.
And then what about the second part of the question? I'm curious, because I've encountered a few of these cases where I've found myself doing this little, as an ERP specialist, doing this little dance of I'm trying to let somebody have a more flexible relationship to their fear of relapsing without actually having them relapse, which would be a really bad thing, right? So they're not walking down an aisle of a store where mouthwash is sold, for example, right? So they're not using the only plans to use, but their OCD is telling them that if they even walk down that aisle and there's alcohol in the mouthwash, they might touch it and a molecule might get, on their lip or something like that, and they will have relapsed, and then they have to go confess to their sponsor and they have to turn in the chips and all the rest of that, right? So that's OCD to me. That's not addiction, right? And I'm going to be doing exposures saying like, well, let's walk down that aisle. Let's actually pick up the Listerine and put it down and go like this on our face or something like that. But I'm constantly thinking like, okay, just tread carefully here. So do you encounter people, I mean, I realize you're not an OCD specialist, but you must encounter just numbers wise people who, yes, they're sober and they're abstaining, but all their sobriety has kind of like a 24/7 full-time job to the point of it actually not being very healthy. Have you ever encountered that?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm sure I have, but again, I don't think of it in terms of OCD terms. And so, you know, and I sort of have a sense of humor about me when I'm working with people with that. I'm like, well, that, you know, you're not going to get high by walking down an aisle. I mean, come on now. I mean, so I might not handle it the right way, but
right. Your instinct would be to reassure them and to encourage them not to take themselves so seriously, right?
Exactly. You know, and even like, you know, for example, oh gosh, I've had people call me where they've accidentally, you know, were somewhere and they took a sip of something and they could tell that it had alcohol in it, and then they're flipping out. Oh my God. Oh my God. I'm like, well, did you take a second sip? No. Well, good. Then it wasn't a relapse. It's only a relapse if you take the second sip. You know, if it was totally an accident.
Right. My people would say, well, how do I know that I didn't take a second sip? Or how do I know that I didn't want
to? You need to call Jon.
How do I know what was in my heart? What were my intentions with the sip? That's how the OCD gets you. Yeah. So it can be really challenging juggling these things. The other thing I've noticed with some of my OCD patients who are also managing their sobriety is trying to work the 12 steps in a fashion that the OCD will allow, or that doesn't make the OCD worse. So the one I hear the most about is the moral inventory, because I deal with people who have moral scrupulosity. They think everything they've ever done, thought, or felt is bad. And so something like writing out a list of all the ways in which your relationship to drugs and alcohol have harmed other people is extraordinarily painful for them. And they can kind of use it as a form of self-punishment. Like, I'm just going to destroy myself here. And obviously that's not what that step is intended for. Do you, when you're working with people who have this sort of personality and this sort of quality to them, make modifications to the approach in the 12 step to make sure that the message is actually connecting with the person, that it's not just the words in the book?
Oh yes. And first of all, I want to say that's not an OCD thing. People come in and they hear, you know, you start listening to what those steps are and you hear that moral inventory, and most people already, you know, feel like the worst person on the planet, regardless of whether they have OCD or not. And so that step is a very painful, challenging, difficult step for a lot of people. And knowing that, you know, what I suggest people do is that, first of all, everything you've done is already done. You've survived it. I look at it as surviving, right? You've already been there, done it. And you don't have to worry about that moral inventory right this second, right? You're going to build a relationship with a sponsor. You don't work steps by yourself. I mean, that's a no-no. So if you're going to, you know, commit to a 12-step fellowship, you're going to have a sponsor. You're going to work the first couple steps and build trust in that person. And you don't have to tell your moral inventory to the whole world. Right. You're going to share it with your sponsor. And when the worst thing you can do on a moral inventory is get stuck in the middle of it. You just want to go through it. And so remember that you've already been there, done that. You already feel bad about yourself. We're not, this is just not, you don't want to get stuck there, write it down, move forward. Right. And then it's the sharing it with the sponsor. That's usually the hard part too. Like the fifth step is when you actually share that moral inventory. Right. But the good news is, what I also tell people is that the rest of the steps actually are going to help you get rid of all that shame and guilt. You know, it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight, but there's a way, you know, to clean house, so to speak. So by the time you get through with step 9, which is finally making some amends, you know, the last 3 steps are about just sort of maintaining a day-to-day, you know, try not to build up any more crud, you know, but really the steps are laid out in such a way that you really do get to a point of freedom, really severe freedom of, you know, worrying about, you know, it comes down to sort of forgiving yourself at some point. You know, people are nowhere near ready to hear that in the beginning, that there's no way I could ever forgive myself for all the things I've done. There's no way people would forgive me for what I've done. You know, so that's not something they can really comprehend in the beginning, but it really is what happens for people who stick and stay clean, work through the steps, that you're able to get to a place of forgiveness. So give yourself a break, is sort of, as I'm saying, going through it. Like, you know, you've already done it. It is what it is. just going to write it down.
Well, as you're describing it, it's making me think of a metaphor. It's kind of gross, I guess, but the way you're describing it made me think of the metaphor of sort of somebody has this wound and they've just patched it up with drugs and alcohol or compulsions or avoidance or secrecy.
Yeah.
And the thing is, because they didn't really tend to it properly, it's like scarring and it's festering and it hurts and it's inflamed. And some of these steps that are really challenging, it really are opening up that wound.
Correct.
And then properly cleaning it, properly stitching it, so that it can actually properly heal.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And it's scary. It's scary, right? That's why you need to have you're in a program of people who are supporting you through this, because they've done it. They can assure you that it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Just don't use no matter what. Do the steps. If you're just trying to do it by yourself, you need a cheering squad. And that's basically what, the report 12-step community or whatever support group you're in. It's like a cheering squad for you, like a pep rally or something. Like, people really do care and want you to succeed. And so it's a supportive environment where that the people that are cheering you on have also walked the same road ahead of you.
I would imagine a lot of people have difficulty accepting that help, even when they decide this is enough, I'm ready for sobriety, to accept and to view as genuine the support and the love that they get from their community, because they've had their trust violated so many times either by themselves or by other people in their lives. And so someone saying like, hey, I'm sober, you're sober, let's support each other. I would imagine there are a lot of people who are like, yeah, okay, you support me because we're all in this group together, but really you don't care about me at all because nobody does, right?
That's a definite thing for a lot of people. And all you can say is, well, we say, keep coming back. And you will see eventually they can't all be lying all the time. You know what I'm saying? Like, they can't all like me that much. That's how I think people begin to get self-esteem and self-worth. When you have none, and that's the feeling that you have, you have to help me because I'm paying you, or, oh, you have to help me because we're all in this 12-step fellowship, whatever. But if after enough time goes by, it just, all these people can't be lying to me. Like, maybe I'm not a piece of crap 100% of the time. Maybe there is something worthwhile about me. It's kind of like this process. You just can't keep being a piece of crap in the middle of all these people that are not treating you that way, if that makes sense. Like, it just doesn't jive.
Yeah, well, actually, that's sort of how I think about exposure and response prevention, which is, if you do this thing that you're afraid of and you believe that you can't tolerate the uncertainty, and so you have to do your compulsions whenever you're around that trigger, well, let's just keep getting around that trigger and not do our compulsions, and just look at the evidence afterwards. And let's find out after 1,000 times if indeed you can handle the uncertainty. Yep. And in this case, it's the uncertainty of whether or not these people really care about me, or they're just lying to me because they're part of some cult or something like that, right? But I think it's true also internally. I see people realize, like, listen, I still don't know if this thing is safe, if this thing is going to hurt me, right? Because we don't get certainty in life. Right. But I do know, I have that internalized confidence that I can handle it if things don't go my way. And I wouldn't have known that if I didn't have exposure.
That's exactly the goal of recovery, is just build confidence in yourself. To get to the point where someone can say, hey, we're going to go on this cruise in January. You want to go? In early recovery, a person was like, they wouldn't even know if they would still be, clean, or who knows what. Like, they can't plan anything in the future. To get to a point where you're able to just stay clean one day at a time, and you work all these, it's not just about abstinence. Let me just say that too. Recovery is not abstinence. Abstinence is not recovery. That's
an important distinction. Yeah,
it really is. And so you get to a point where you have confidence in your ability to stay clean, confidence in your ability to be able to plan a trip way down the road, because your life is such that I am expecting I'll still be clean. I am expecting I'll still be in recovery, and that, yes, I can go on that trip. But in the early phases of recovery, it's like, I don't you don't have confidence in your ability to do it until you have practice.
Yeah, well, that's so true in OCD work as well. And I see people get better and like really get better, not just resist their compulsions, but actually re-engage with their lives and reclaim all the things that they lost to their OCD.
Yep.
When the OCD shows up when they have a minor lapse or a trigger or something like that, their attitude is, when they're really recovered in a masterful way, it's something like, oh, you again, right? It's sort of like, oh yeah, I recognize you, like the Buddhists would say, I see you, Mara, right? Like, oh, there you are, right? Yeah. It sounds like it's very much the same with addiction. Like you live with it, you're aware of it, but you don't live in constant fear of it because you understand it and how it's integrated into your life. Yep. That's amazing. What is your
analogies?
What is your sort of just on a personal note, kind of like what inspires you the most when you're working with people with substance use disorders? I mean, you must see a lot of people go from dark places to much different places.
That is what inspires me. So, when I first got into this field, you don't often get to see the end result because, they come and they go. And so, early on, I knew that I had to just plant the seed, planting a seed of that you can ask for help when it's not a horrible experience, that, hey, that wasn't so bad. And B, as far as specifically addiction stuff, that, where do I need to do and where do I go for help? So that seed would be the goal, right? And so anything beyond that would be like, awesome, because I might never see people again. So, getting a call, a couple of years later from somebody that I worked with as a teenager saying, Miss Denise, I got in trouble. Can I come talk to you? Sorry, you're in trouble. But, knowing that they had that experience, they could pick up the phone and come back and, pick up where we left off, learn some new things. That's one thing that's kept me going as far as, the work, the day-to-day work, because I've been doing this for over 20 years and I'm not burnt out on it yet. It's really recovery is the passion that drives me. So, that is excitement and enthusiasm comes through. Sometimes I'm over the top for people. I know that, but it's true that they know, like, wow, that this lady just is very, very enthusiastic about recovery. But being able to see that process, or sending someone to their first meeting and gosh, I'm just like, want them to go, because, we want people to try support groups while they're here. We're not a 12-step program, but we, encourage it. I want you to find something. So when they go to that first meeting and they come back and they're like, oh my God, I am an addict. Oh my God, I am an alcoholic. I'm like, I told you. No, I don't really put the labels on them. They do that themselves.
No, but I've been there too.
But it's
I
just
really think I do have OCD. That's what I've been saying.
I know, but that's the thing. It's like, yes. So, and then the enthusiasm for that, and it's just watching the seed grow in some people, and knowing, and personally, just being around people in recovery and seeing how lives have changed, and, how somebody who would, steal your stuff and help you look, it'll help you look for it in an active addiction, it's now someone you would, trust, with your life. It's amazing, right? Because nobody signs up to be an addict. Nobody says, hey, I think I'm going to be an addict when I grow up, or an alcoholic, or hey, give me some bipolar. I want some of that.
Right.
Nobody signs up for these things. So to be able to see it's the process of, just recovery, not abstinence, but being in recovery and watching people's lives change. And you can even see that process here at the retreat. Sure, they have, way further to go, but just to be able to see someone wake up to the possibility of like, wow, I can do this. Me, there is hope. That's what keeps me going every day. That's beautiful.
It's so true in OCD too. It's not just about stopping, resisting compulsions, and like we were talking about before, white knuckling. It's actually about re-engaging with your life and finding some meaning in it and some value in your role. And I learned something in this discussion. Actually, we always kind of think about, you have the condition and then you overcome the condition, and the hard part is, whether it's overcoming your fears in OCD or overcoming your urges to use in substance use disorders. In both cases, there's this sort of other thing that's like the ultimate exposure, which is really taking the risk of letting yourself receive support, of letting yourself admit that maybe you're not alone. And that requires ongoing exposure, whether it's exposure to the 12-step meetings or literal exposure in OCD, that, when you go to talk to your therapist for the first time and tell them what you're really thinking and what you're really doing about it. That's so hard for so many people to just take that risk of being respected, of being loved by another person.
Got it. And then built into that, and so any kind of support group is also, and especially in 12-step, then you also become the person that gets to help the next person coming in. So then you also feel the beauty of helping someone else also helps you. and it's selfless, right? So in the beginning, it's like, oh my gosh, why would they want to help little old me? And it's really hard to ask for help. And then you receive it and it feels good. And it's like, wow. And then you actually get to give that to somebody else. You have to give it away to keep it. That's the thing. And then that feels good. So then you become, being of service. I think, what is life all about? Relationships and connection. We don't get to take any stuff with us. It's all about relationships. So how can we have the best relationships? We learn in these communities and any kind of support group how to be in relation with people, because I don't know, a lot of times not taught that, not taught to talk about what's really going on. We're taught to talk surface stuff. And what's really going on is that we want to connect. And that yearning, that, whether it's the OCD, compulsive things people do, whether it's putting a substance in, there's something missing. There's this, I call it the void, but there's just something missing here. And, I argue that is connection with others. So that starts to get filled in. And then at some point, if you're some kind of a connection with some kind of a power greater than yourself, I don't care what you believe in, I'm just saying there's this yearning for connection, that I'm not the only one, I'm not alone, and that being in relationship with another person, heart to heart, real communication, starts to fill that void. And then,
real connection too makes a difference, right? Because there's a lot of fake connecting that we do, like with our, like in SUD, you would think, oh, I have a real connection with the person that I get high with, or real connection with my dealer. Or in OCD, I feel like I'm connected to people all the time because I'm constantly asking them for reassurance and they're constantly telling me everything's going to be okay. But those aren't the types of connections that you're talking about, because they're really a function of the disorder. They're really the opposite of a connection. They're disconnecting you from true vulnerability and intimacy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the real connection is somebody that you don't even know coming to pick you up when you get out of jail because someone in the program knows that you know what I'm saying? Like, hey, go get so-and-so standing outside of the jail. Like, someone comes and picks you up and takes you to a meeting. I mean, hello, why would they do that? They don't even know me.
Right.
I mean, it's how it starts. Like, it starts by just questioning, like, wow, are these people, is this for real? Yeah, it is for real. And if you stick around, that's why it's important to continue going to support. It's not one and done. I mean, you're not recovered. It's a process of recovering. And so again, until there's some magical cure, the medicine every day is that support. So we have to stay in touch with whatever support group we're in, 12-step recoveries, whatever you're doing, so that you can continue to see that people care about you. And then you start to care about other people legitimately. Oh my gosh, I just want to help this person, not because of what they can do for me. And when you first realize that, wow, it's pretty impressive. I don't even want anything in return. Imagine that.
Yeah. Denise, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about these issues. And this is really eye-opening. And it sounds like you're doing great work and really helping a lot of people. So happy to know you and happy to have you on the show.
Yeah, I'm really glad we're being able to work together. It's awesome. So thanks for having me.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye.